Good afternoon. This is David Kuhn with the Alabama Cooperative Extension System, and I'd like to welcome everybody to our last installment of the 2016 All Bugs, Good and Bad webinar series, Rats, Mice, and Rodenticides. This webinar series is brought to you by the following E-Extension Communities of Practice, Imported Fire Ants and Urban IPM, by the Alabama Cooperative Extension System, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service, Clemson Cooperative Extension, and the University of Georgia Center for Urban Agriculture. Our next webinar series for 2017 will begin February the 3rd and will be on tramp ants and will be brought to you by Ms. Karen Vail. As we go about this webinar series, if you have questions, please enter them in the chat box to the left, and also if you have ideas for new topics or topics you would like to see covered, please enter those in the chat box also, and they'll be recorded by our moderators. At the end of the webinar, there'll be 4 survey questions. Please take the time to fill those out. Simple clicks of the mouse so we can record that data. Our speaker for today is Mr. Ted Breach from Leaf Tech Incorporated. Ted started as a pest control tech, moved on to supervisor and manager for a large pest control company for 7 to 8 years, and is now the technical director for Leaf Tech Incorporated with over 20 years of rodent control and research. So I'm going to turn it over to Ted and let him get started.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. I always kind of like doing these things because it took me a little while to get used to doing the first one. I'm used to doing presentations in a shirt and tie. Today I'm doing jeans and a t-shirt. But anyway, what we're going to do for the next half hour or so is focus on rats and mice and rodent control methods, not just rodenticides. We'll talk about some traps and such as well. But we'll be focusing on the commensal rodents, that being the Norway rat, also known as the brown rat, the black rat, also known as the roof rat, and of course the house mouse. So if I can make the technology work, it did. All right. The agenda: house mouse, as I said, brown rat, black rat. We'll talk a little bit about traps and trapping. Then we're going to compare rodenticides a little bit. That's just a real short part of the program. And then we'll finish up with some significant changes coming your way in rodenticide label language. There's some good news for a change in that regard. Okay, first of all, we're going to start with some commensal rodent behaviors. These are behaviors that would be common to all 3 of these critters. First one is these guys are all disease vectors, and there's some very nasty stuff that they carry around. Some of these diseases are fatal to humans and pets and wildlife. For example, about 13% of the house mouse population in one study was found to be infected with lymphocytic choriomeningitis, also known as LCM. This is an infection of the brain, or causes a swelling of the brain that can be fatal to people. And there's probably 4 or 5 dozen diseases associated with these rodents. The next behavior is their gnawing behavior. The word rodent is actually derived from the Latin word rodere, which means to gnaw. They gnaw to find food. For example, a lot of rodents will gnaw on things like twigs and branches to gain some moisture and sustenance from below the bark. They can gnaw their way into structures to find food or harborage. It's commonly thought that rodents gnaw on things to shorten or sharpen their teeth. Rodents' teeth will grow as much as 5 or 5.5 inches a year, a rat's teeth anyway. And there's a myth out there that rodents gnaw on things to shorten those teeth. it's kind of the other way around. The teeth grow so fast to keep up with the rodent's gnawing behavior. The way rodents sharpen their teeth is a process called bruxing, B-R-U-X-I-N-G, where their teeth are composed of two layers of dentin. The front layer is very thin and very hard. And then behind that, the bulk of the tooth, of those incisors, those four incisors, is much softer. And what they'll do is they'll take the bottom incisors and pick away at that softer backside dentin and expose a layer of that hard dentin, a very thin layer, and then they will reverse the process to sharpen their lower teeth. So they don't actually, they don't gnaw on wires to, for example, sharpen their teeth. These guys are nocturnal, means they move around at night. Their peak activity periods are usually shortly after dusk, and again right before dawn. Some of them will be active all night. But this and other secretive behaviors, such as their tendency to stick to shadows and out-of-the-way areas and to nest in hard-to-reach areas, makes them difficult to control. They're hard to get at. Omnivorous means they can eat anything, but they prefer things like grains and seeds, and roof rats have a preference for fruits. But they will eat anything. They also have the ability to, and nobody really, I think, understands how they do it, but they do tend to select some foods based on dietary needs. For example, maybe their diet is short in salt, or maybe it's short in fat. And they will tend then to prefer some foods that have those things that they need. All three of these species tend to be colonial. That is, you will have a population that will be headed by usually an alpha male, a dominant, strong animal. He will have one or more alpha females in his family unit. These guys get the best of everything. They get the best place to live. They get first access to the best food. It's all kind of designed to assure survival of the fittest. And then from there, a step down would be the beta animals. The betas would be a notch down on the chain, and they're going to get second best, and they're going to be maybe a little further away from the food, and they may not have first access to the best food. And then finally, you get down to the omegas, and the omegas are the weakest animals in the colony, and these are probably the animals you see moving around during daylight hours, because if they move around at night, they kind of get beat up and picked on by the more dominant animals. So these guys, they get what's left. Then scent plays an awful big role in a colony of rodents. Each individual, of course, has his or her own scent. They use scent to mark territory the way many mammals do. They'll lay scent trails with pheromone between their nest and their food. The females, when females are in estrus, they'll have a scent that lets males know that they're available. So you've got this whole scent thing going on, and a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about the scent. For example, they believe that the alpha male's scent is conferred, or the alpha male scent is conferred on a rodent, when actually that animal, the strongest animal, has his own scent, and there's nothing magic about the scent. It's just his scent. There are other senses that come into play with these guys. Vision is not particularly good. It's a nocturnal animal. They move around in the dark. They really don't see or really need that high degree of vision. They can see clearly for a few feet maybe, and then beyond that, it kind of fades to shapes and shadow and movement. They have a phenomenal sense of taste. As a rodenticide manufacturer, this is our number one challenge, is getting a rat or a mouse to eat something that tastes bad. And we spend a lot of time and money trying to overpower the taste of the active ingredient in a rodenticide. They also have an excellent sense of hearing and an excellent sense of touch. And their sense of touch extends pretty much to their whole body. They have, of course, the whiskers on their face, but they also have vibrissae or guard hairs pretty much all over their bodies that can kind of tell them a lot about their environment. For example, it can tell them when they're in the ideal sized burrow, for example, when they can feel surfaces all around them. They know that they're in a hole that's just the right size. All of these guys are incredibly adaptable. A Norway rat or a brown rat always wants to try to behave like a brown rat. Same thing for a black rat. They always want to try to behave as their species would. But if something happens to make that difficult to do, they can adapt. For example, I've been involved in situations with roof rats or black rats, which should be living in the upper reaches of a building. This was a poultry operation. Since there wasn't enough space in the attic, the rodents actually, the roof rats actually expanded downward and burrowed into the manure in the manure pit, and were behaving more like a brown rat. By the tens of thousands, they were in that environment. So all of these guys, they can adapt as they need to, which of course makes our job harder. A few general control tips here. These are things that just kind of overarching over the rest of the stuff we're going to talk about as we go along. First of all, you always need to choose the right control for each individual situation. Sometimes it's traps, sometimes it's rodenticides. When it comes to things like sanitation and exclusion, I find those to be more useful for preventing problems rather than eliminating an infestation. For example, if you've got a structure that has a heavy mouse infestation on the inside, cleaning up the spillage can force those rodents to stop feeding, to start feeding on something that's not spillage, something that's the good stuff up on the shelves. And if you've got situations where, again, you've got a heavy infestation in a structure and you spend a lot of time and money excluding or sealing up the building, and if that's the only money that you had available, it would be better spent on, first of all, eliminating the infestation and then trying to keep others from coming in. One of the things that ends up being a big cause of rodent control failures is not having enough control material out, not using enough traps, not using enough rodenticide. There are a couple of things that rodents do that make it very easy for us to misjudge how many of them there are. That secretive nature. We don't really see them all. They have a tremendous reproductive potential. All these critters have large litters very often. And one of the key things that comes into play here is the fact that when a female rat or mouse delivers a litter of pups, she can become pregnant again within about 24 to 48 hours. So she may have one litter of pups in the nest while she's creating the next litter inside her body. And then those gestation and lactation periods are pretty close to one another, just a few days apart. So these rodents are just kind of baby-making machines. And that if we're going after a population of rodents with just a few traps or just a little bit of rodenticide, they can easily outbreed our attempts. The other thing is, a lot of people have come to the belief that that traps and bait stations have this, I don't know, almost magical quality about them, that if they put this black box down or these silver boxes spaced out according to some predetermined distance, they will just, the rodents will be drawn to them and commit suicide just to make us happy. In reality, we need to figure out where the critters are moving. We need to find out where they're living and where they're feeding, and then get between the two of them. We've got to make this stuff very easy for them to find. It has to be very close to their runways. Okay. Bear with me here while I get this little arrow lined up. The key with any rodent infestation or solving any rodent infestation is persistence. One of the things that happens with that colonial nature, if you've got those alphas living in an area and you start your control effort in that area and you knock those alphas down, you kill them, the next thing that's going to happen is those betas are going to realize sooner or later that real estate just opened up and that better harborage opened up, and then they from there move. Okay, and you come back, if you do it right, you come back say a week later and treat those new alphas, kill them, and then here come the omegas. They're moving and they take over. So you can collapse an entire colony into a very small area. The converse of that is if you're working on the omegas and you don't realize that the alphas are some distance away, those alphas can keep repopulating those omegas, and that situation can go on for a very long time. I've seen people fighting that battle for years before they figured out that the problem was actually coming from somewhere else. Okay, let's talk about a couple of species-specific behaviors. We don't have a lot of time to get into a lot of nitty-gritty detail here, but we'll talk about little house mouse first, and the fact that this animal is a cavity nester, as they all are, but these nests can be just about anywhere. They can be high, low, dug into dirt, into insulation. They like to be someplace warm. Quite often you'll find these guys in, I've seen them in plate warmers in restaurants. I've seen them in refrigerator compressor compartments. So they have a very low tolerance for cold. When it comes to their range, in the book, pick a book, it will tell you that they travel about 30 feet between a nest and food. Well, not always. You know, if their nest is only 30 inches from their food source, that's about as far as they're going to go, and they're just going to keep going back and forth. And then the books will tell us, okay, space your traps or your bait stations 8, 10, 12, 15 feet apart. If you don't have those control agents right between those two places, your chances of success are limited. Going beyond that 30 feet, if the mouse doesn't have a good place to live within 30 feet of food, I've seen that number go closer to 90 or even more than 90 feet between where that mouse was living and where he was feeding. That particular one was in a supermarket where the mouse was living in the produce department, but he had a taste for snack chips, and he actually gnawed a hole through a wall, ran under the bread racks along that wall, crossed 5 aisles to get to the snack chips. While we're talking about that, mice are nibblers, and quite often in this particular place, that one mouse or possibly two mice were nibbling holes in probably 8 to 12 bags of chips a night, and that's one of the behaviors of that critter. And I guess we should have remembered I had this slide coming. Their feeding behavior is such that they only eat about 1/10 of an ounce a day, but they tend to take that from multiple places, and that can that can kind of mess up your thinking about what's actually going on. If you've got just one mouse or do you have 10 mice, if that mouse is nibbling from 8 or 10 bags of chips in a night, it can kind of make you think it's worse than it really is. When it comes to control, one of the things that we want to keep in mind with this animal is the fact that they're hoarders. They love seeds, and they love to pack seeds into their nesting area. I had one situation in a human hoarder's house where they had found records indicated this person had bought 2.5 tons of bird seed for 4 birds over the course of a couple of years, and where all that seed ended up was in the wall voids, and some of the wall voids were packed from floor to ceiling. The mice chewed a hole at floor level, packed it full until they couldn't get out, and then went up a few feet and chewed another hole. And they had those walls packed full of bird seed. Basically, I learned a couple of lessons from that. Number one, don't use pellets for mouse control. When you start using pellets for mouse control, you have to be prepared for the fact that they're going to pick them up and move them someplace, and they'll put them someplace where they're nesting. That could be, and I've seen it in children's toy box. I've seen it in shoes more than once. In a whole bunch of different places. What you want to do with this guy, if you're going to use rodenticides, is to rely more on the solid materials, things like blocks or now the new soft bait materials, things that you can secure in a bait station or on a piece of wire or in some other way, keep it so that the rodent can't drag it around. Okay, the brown rat, aka Norway rat, Rattus norvegicus. This is the guy that got me interested in rodent control work big time about 40 years ago. Actually 43 years ago now. When you look at this animal, notice 2 things about him that we'll focus on a little bit later when we start talking about the black rat or the roof rat. The first thing is that tail length. If you were to take that tail and stretch it out straight, it would not go past his nose. The other thing are those little ears and the beady little eyes. He's pretty easy to distinguish from his much skinnier and different looking counterpart. This animal is a ground dweller, an earth dweller. He wants to be dug into holes in the dirt. Now, I said before, he's adaptable. He can live in insulation. He can live in ceiling voids. But in general, he wants to dig a hole in the dirt, and that's where he wants to live. When it comes to his range, there's some recent research that's pegged that number at about 450 feet. That's a football field and a half. So if he has a really good food source in one area and a really good harborage area in the other, or if maybe this animal is at one of the omegas and he's down at the bottom of the pecking order, they may travel as much as 450 feet to get food. I was working a site just last week where the rats were living in one abandoned. It was in the city. And he was living in the backyard of an abandoned house and traveling all the way, a whole block away, to get the bird seed that one of the neighbors was putting out. So they can travel great distances. They want to be close. They would rather be a couple of inches or a couple of feet away from their food, but they will travel significant distances if they have to. When it comes to feeding, this guy will eat about 1 ounce a day. He also needs to take about 1 ounce to 2 ounces of water every day. And they tend to take that from a single site. Okay. So now, Can you guys still hear me? I'm getting a funny tone from my phone.
You're good, Ted.
Okay, all right, thank you. Controlling this guy, the common technique is to use bait stations, and in that bait station you can put rodenticide or traps. The problem with that is rats really don't like bait stations, and they tend to shy away from them. So quite often, what you may have to do is find ways to get take the fight to him. And in my mind, the best way to control, eliminate a brown rat or Norway rat infestation is to take pellet or meal bait and pour it right down the burrow. The labels have changed recently on block and soft bait. Those materials cannot be put down in rat burrows. It only has to be loose material. Get it down about 6 inches, and then don't cave the burrow in. By caving the burrow in, you change the critter's behavior from eating to getting the door open again. And in the process, you may kick all those pellets back out. Black rat, aka roof rat, look at this guy and look at that tail. And look at those ears. He's very easy to distinguish from his brown rat cousin. And this rodent wants to live up high. In nature, he's arboreal. He's a tree dweller. He loves to be in the crown of palms. He loves to feed on citrus. And when he gets into structures, his tendency is to live up high, live up in attics, 2 holes in walls and floors or ceilings, whatever he has to do to move around. In this case here, you're looking at the ceiling in a poultry house, and the rat had chewed a hole through the ceiling so that it could use that cable that's running to the top left of the picture to move from point A to point B and get into his little hole there. Their range has been pegged at about 300 feet, and that's, think about that. That's quite a ways. But again, they would much rather live real close to their food than have to travel great distances for it. They eat a little bit less than the brown rat. They tend to take it from maybe just a few spaces or a few sites rather than the way the brown rat tends to just sit there and hunker down and eat till he's full. When it comes to eliminating these animals, you can use traps. You can use them standalone, or you can put them in bait stations. One of the things that I've found works pretty well lately is I'll put a trap in a bait station like you see here, and I may mount it vertically, I may mount it horizontally, depending on what the conditions are. And then I'll take little strips of terry cloth, maybe 3 or 4 inches long and maybe 3/4 or a ½ inch wide, and lay a couple of those, one of those inside of each entry point, and then put some more in the back of the trap, so the rat has to step on the trap to get to that nesting material. If you're looking for food materials for that animal, you may want to look at things like dates and figs. And one of the things I found works pretty well are the organic orange slice candies. These are ones that are naturally flavored. The cheap artificially flavored ones. Artificial flavoring is nothing more than a collection of chemicals designed to trick the human very poor sense of taste. And I don't know what they taste like to rodents, but I'm guessing that not nearly as good as they do to us. Some new rodenticide technology out there right now. You saw a picture earlier of these pouches of material called soft bait. I think we've got 3 brands now, and I know that there's at least another 3 or 4 out there in the marketplace. It's in our case anyway. I can only speak what's in ours. They're primarily flour and vegetable oil, much more palatable than wax blocks. Much more palatable. Not perfect. And the other thing that comes into play, especially when you're dealing in the South and the Southwest, is they won't melt like wax blocks. They tend to stay on the rod, but you can use it just like a block in any place that you can use a block. And part of the situation with soft bait is it's in that paper pouch, and the same thing holds true for place packs. You would put those pouches in the bait station. The rodents might get in there, and there might be little bits of paper that ended up in and around the station, and it caused some issues. So we went and built this little feeding device that goes inside of a bait station. We showed it to EPA, and then the EPA allowed us to put language on our label that says you can take the paper off if you put it in that feeding device. And that feeding device fits in our bait stations, but also a lot of in fact, most of the common brands. We tested this thing on house mice. That was easy, but we weren't so sure it was going to work on rats. Come to find out, it worked fine on both the commensal species. We also tried it on wood rats or pack rats in the Southwest. A few snap trapping tips. The older, the more used the trap is, the better it is. The fact that trap may have killed a rodent doesn't have the smell of death on it, just has the smell of whatever rodent it killed on it. And that trap tends to be more attractive than a brand new trap. When you're trapping rodents, again, we go back to that population and how many rodents are in that population. You don't want to go after them with just a single trap. If I'm going after what I think is one mouse, I'll probably go after them with a half a dozen or maybe even a dozen traps. There are some new traps. The lower image or the middle image on the right side of the slide is a trap that is intended not to break the animal's back. It's not as hard on fingers as the upper rat trap might be, but the downside is it takes longer for the rodent to die. And then the other thing to consider is, do you want to use an expanded trigger? The expanded trigger is fine if the animal is not real suspicious. And when a rat comes up to a trap, he tends to come up to it very gingerly and poke at it with a paw, maybe nudge it with a snout. And if that thing fires before his head is fully committed, he will become trap shy just that quickly. I never set snap traps without pre-baiting them first. Pre-baiting is putting a large amount of food on the trap and then leaving it unset until that rodent is taking food without hesitation. And then I put just a little bit of bait on the trigger and surprise him. Multi-catch traps. There's the two most common types are the tip ramp, the lower picture, or the wind-up, the catch-all in the upper picture. They both have upsides and downsides. The one on the lower right is the tip ramp. The rodent enters through that little hole on the side, and there's a mechanism in there that lets them get in without getting back out again. They can be placed in areas that are lower and they're easier to maintain in their proper position. The downside is because they're so low, quite often rodents will just scurry over the top of them. The wind-up trap, I have less trouble with rodents running over the top of them, but they're harder to maintain in their proper position, which is about an inch and a half away from the wall and parallel to the wall. A lot of people set them perpendicular to the wall and tight up against the wall, and that works also, just maybe a little bit less quickly than the way the manufacturer initially tested it and found it to work. These devices rely on a mouse's natural tendency to look for a place to hide. Do they need to be baited? Probably not. But it sometimes helps if you've got some critters that are being a little suspicious about entering a new trap. One thing to keep in mind, if you've got a situation where rodenticides are inappropriate, even outdoors, these traps will work outside. Of course, they're going to get rusty if they, quicker than if they're indoors. But I've very successfully over the years used catch-all traps in outdoor settings where I did not want to use rodenticides. When it comes to rodenticides, there's basically three groups. The first one are the non-anticoagulants, bromethalin, cholecalciferol, zinc phosphide. All of these are pretty fast-acting, zinc being the quickest. They all act, the zinc will start acting maybe in minutes, bromethalin in certainly a day. But that fast action gives you a quick kill if they ate a lethal dose. If they did not eat a lethal dose, they're going to become bait shy. They're going to get sick quickly enough that they're going to be able to make the connection between what they ate and the fact that now they're not feeling well. The other thing that holds true for all three of these active ingredients is the concentrations of bad tasting active ingredient is pretty high. Bromethalin is the lowest at 100 parts per million, cholecalciferol at 750, and zinc phosphide at 20,000. So sometimes it's very difficult to get rodents to eat these materials. The other thing, the downside is there are no antidotes for any one of these three. Treatment for a pet that got into something is just symptomatic. They're made in a variety of formulations, blocks, pellets, soft bait, tracking powder. You can get a variety of different delivery methods. And we've got the first generation anticoagulants. Anticoagulants work by making the blood thin and reducing the ability of the blood to clot. It affects the vitamin K mechanism in the clotting method. And so the animal basically hemorrhages, and as it runs out of blood, it basically runs out of energy, and usually they die in the nest. Not always, but the three most common active ingredients here, and in fact, I think these are the only three that are registered in the U.S., chlorphacinone, diphacinone, and warfarin. Warfarin being the oldest and with a history of resistance. All of them are very slow acting, and they require multiple nights feeding in general. So, the animal, the rodent, doesn't equate the lethargy, the tiredness that he's feeling to what he ate. So you get very little bait shyness, and because now we're talking about concentrations in chlorphacinone and diphacinone anyway, down in 50 parts per million, there's less bait aversion. All three of them have the same single readily available antidote, and that's vitamin K1. There's also vitamin K2 and K3. They also have long chemical names, but those two materials don't work. There's a synthetic vitamin K in most pet food that is actually vitamin K, sometimes called vitamin K3. That does not offer any antidotal effect at all. Again, a lot of different formulations, different delivery mechanisms you can get to use these materials. And then finally, the second generation anticoagulants. These are the more modern chemistry, bromadiolone, brodifacoum coming from the 70s up to difethiolone in the 90s. The big difference with difethiolone, all of these other products up until difethiolone were formulated at 50 parts per million. And when Leafotech was looking to develop difethiolone, they realized that they really didn't need the active ingredient to be that strong, that they could get by with reducing that down to 25 parts per million, still being very effective and at the same time reducing risk to non-target animals. Again, it's very slow acting. First dead animals are going to show up 4 to 5 days, but it only takes one night's feeding. They will probably eat more than one night, but it only takes just the one. Again, very little bait aversion, no bait shyness. And again, that single readily available antidote in vitamin K1, and again, a variety of formulations. We've also done some work, and some work's been done by Kaukainen and by Cambridge, and they're finding some stuff happening in Europe right now. rats and mice seem to prefer going into something that they can, I don't know if they can see their way out or if they can sense that there's an opening at the other end. But we've seen quite a bit of preference for bait stations and traps that have a straight through design. Okay, let's talk about the changes to the rodenticide labels that are coming your ways. First of all, some time ago, the language on the label said you had to use those rodenticides in or within 50 feet of a building. Building wasn't defined, and it left a lot of things susceptible. For example, the pest control industry has been trying to get the food industry to put their dumpsters 75 or 100 feet away from the kitchen door to keep critters attracted to that dumpster from next thing going into the kitchen. So eventually the EPA said, okay, all right, we'll say within 100 feet of a man-made structure. And then there was a lot of negotiating about what a structure was. And EPA's concern was for putting bait stations great lengths along fences when there's really no reason to have them out there. Basically, a fence does not count as a man-made structure, but things like trash cans and dumpsters and, I mean, just about anything else that a human built counts as a man-made structure. Now, 8 more species are being added to the label. Up until recently, it said house mouse, Norway rat, roof rat only. So now EPA has consented to let us add the critters you see on the list in front of you, the voles and wood rats and Polynesian rat, couple more mice. Most manufacturers either have them on their label right now, or they're in the process of putting them on the label, depending on how quickly they can print labels. They've also begun to allow us to add these 3 mice to the label. Now, these 3 critters, before they allowed us to add them to the label, because they're of such significant health importance, they've asked us to prove that any rodenticide we put these guys on the label will actually kill them. And I know that we and other rodenticide manufacturers are in that process right now. It's kind of a lengthy process to go through all those scientific studies, but it is in progress. We kind of went through a lot of stuff really quickly here. If you want more information, if you go to our website and you get to our main page and click on pest management, it'll open up a menu and you can get down to that thing where the arrow is pointing to literature. There's a bunch of technical bulletins. There's a veterinarian's guide that's basically written for veterinarians on how to treat an animal that like a dog or a cat that might have gotten into something it shouldn't have. And there's a new one there now. We've just come out with a bromethalin soft bait, so we've got an addendum to that for bromethalin. Like I said, there's all kinds of labels and a lot of different materials on that website, and they're almost all, I think all of them are in PDF format. The other thing, if you're in a position where you have a lot of people you need to train in rodent control and you would like multiple copies of these without having to download them all, you can reach out to your Leafitech rep and they can get pre-printed materials for you. Okay, with that.
All right, if I could get the folks to go ahead and put the survey questions up for us. And as those pop up and we go ahead and take those, and if you have questions for Ted, please type them in the chat box to the left of the screen over there. And also, if you have ideas for new topics for our webinar series, please be sure to type those in also. right, as we go through, we've got about 73 folks on the webinar, and we're approaching that number here on our results. Again, if you've got ideas for new webinar topics, please post those in the chat box, as well as any questions for Ted.
We have a question from Rhonda.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, a female rat goes back into estrus again 24 to 48 hours after delivering a litter of pups. It's one of the things that makes them, enables them to quite often outbreed control efforts. There's a question there I see, if rodents are found or killed in an attic, how do you control the smell? Yeah, that's one of those double-edged swords. If you go after them in an attic, you're gonna have an odor issue, especially if you're dealing with rats. Mice, the bodies are so small that you may not notice it. Rats, you may want to start with a lot of heavy-duty pre-baiting with snap traps and get them, knock that population as far down as you can with snap traps. You may not be able to eliminate it, but then if you have to finish with a rodenticide to totally eliminate the population, the odor will be less. And then when it comes to dealing with that odor, usually if something dies someplace that's warm and dry, it's not as bad as, the odor isn't as bad as if it dies someplace that's cool and damp. And the other thing that you can do is if you have, say, rats dead in an attic, if you can ventilate that attic to the outside, you can take that odor and draw it away from the living space. I've done the same thing where I've had rodents die in walls, and I used little computer fans to draw the odor into a space that it didn't matter, rather than have the odor seeping out into an occupied space.
Okay, Ted, I think there's several other questions. One is asking about LSM and what the 13% was again.
Oh, that was lymphocytic choriomeningitis, also known as LCM.
Okay, and there's another question asking about sticky boards and how effective they are.
Yeah, sticky traps, the glue traps, when they first hit the market, when I was a technician back in the 70s, they were phenomenal. But over especially on mice, not so much on rats, but that neophobic behavior in rats, and lately we may be starting to see it in mice. The rodents have a tendency to come up to these things, especially the adults, and especially adult males. Adult male mice will come up to something new and they'll test it with a whisker or with a paw. And if they don't like the way it feels, they don't mess with it. So you can enhance the effectiveness of a sticky board. If you use one of the cardboard types, you can roll it up and put it inside of a piece of PVC pipe. And now the mouse may see that as a burrow or a hole to hide in. You can also enhance them by putting something very food source right in the middle. But you got to be careful you don't use something that has oil in it, like peanut butter. If you do, that oil leaches out and forms a film on the glue, and then the glue becomes ineffective. You can put that peanut butter in a bottle cap to corral that glue. It says here, why do mice and rats reside in a structure where there is no food source? Okay, a couple of things. Number one, there's a lot of things that rats and mice can eat in and around the structure. For example, you can have a pretty horrific mouse infestation living in an attic of a home and feeding maybe out in the garage on some pet food, maybe at the dog's dish in the backyard, maybe at the bird feeder. Maybe they're coming out of that attic and feeding in the eaves trough with on the maple seeds and such that collect in the eaves trough. Maybe there's stuff stored in the attic that we don't see as food, but the rodents do. For example, that back in the, was it the 80s and 90s, a lot of people were taking loaves of bread and drying that for artwork. Now I'm seeing those loaves of bread hollowed out by mice. The little macaroni art that children do in kindergarten and first grade, those things get put in the attic and forgotten about. And then there's something that's become more and more common of late, and that's the packing peanuts that we see so often that used to be styrofoam. Now they're cornstarch. And rats and mice can actually eat those. They can eat soap. They can eat dog, cat, raccoon droppings. There's just so many things that they can eat. And if you keep that distance in mind from where they're living to where they're feeding, all of a sudden you realize, oh, whoa, wait a minute. You know, if I'm looking at 50, 60, 80 feet for a house mouse to travel to get food, maybe the mice living in the walls or living in the attic don't need to feed in the house.
Ted, we've got a question from a veterinarian. It said, with the newer rodenticides, are pets who may pick up poisoned or dead mice at greater risk? As a veterinarian, I have treated several pets with exposure to anticoagulant poison pets.
Yeah, first of all, any rodenticide, there's a risk of either primary or secondary exposure. That's why we use tamper-resistant bait stations, trying to keep it away from the dogs and the mice, and then or the dogs and the cats rather. And then we've got that secondary exposure where that dog or cat may eat a poisoned rodent. There's a lot of, it's a very complicated thing that comes into play here. You start off with first of all, what kind of rodent was it? What was the anticoagulant? There's a big difference between difethylone at 25% and rotificum at 50%. Then you know, how many rodents did the pet eat? You know, was it just one or was it 50 or 100? In general, what we usually recommend if there's a concern for a pet, we usually recommend that the first thing they do is establish a prothrombin baseline as soon as possible, so that pet can be monitored to see if that prothrombin time is expanding, and you know, then you can you get more aggressive with the treatment. Most of the exposures that we've had, it's been a single, you know, a cat eating a single mouse or something like that. If you look at the website and you go to that veterinarian's guide, there's some really good information in there about what the LD50 is for dogs and cats for all of the anticoagulant rodenticides, not just ours. I think there's 9 anticoagulant active ingredients, and that website has some detailed information. It's a whole book that you can get just by going to lethotech.com. If a non-treated, oh, wait a minute.
Go ahead, Ted.
Okay, which rodenticides are the least harmful to predators that may eat a poisoned rodent? The least harmful that of any rodenticide that would be inside of a rodent would probably be zinc phosphide. Zinc, the way it metabolizes very quickly inside of a rodent, and it doesn't accumulate in tissue. The problem with zinc is getting rodents to eat it. The other problem is when you've got it out there, birds love to eat it, and eating the rodenticide itself is very toxic to birds. Then if you go to the anticoagulants of all the anticoagulant ingredients, chlorofascinone has the lowest risk rating according to EPA's risk assessment of all the anticoagulants. Now it's very slow. You know, it's a multiple feed anticoagulant, but it has the least risk of the anticoagulants to non-target animals.
Okay, as we wrap up, Ted will still be here to answer questions, and of course, enter your questions in the chat box. You'll also notice an email address to Dr. Kathy Flanders at Auburn. If you have any other feedback from the webinar series and how you use them or how they've affected your behavior, please don't hesitate to send that to Dr. Flanders so we can change or modify these webinars to have the greatest effect. So thank y'all for attending, and thank Ted for jumping in and presenting such an interesting webinar on rats and mice. And again, we'll stay around and answer questions, and please enter them in the chat box if you still have them. Thank you.